What time is it? It's turbo o'clock. Time to clock the turbo. Gauges fitted. Electronic boost controller fitted. Yep. I think it's time for upgraded injectors, upgraded MAF housing, upgraded turbo. Finish off the custom exhaust to match. A chip for the ECU to manage everything, which will complement the cam and the injectors, the MAF and the turbo, and eventually a solution for a intercooler. But for now, because it's the AC model, seems like no one makes, well, not many people make intercoolers for the AC models, and from the ones that I can see, they're either unavailable or absurdly expensive. So I'm just hanging on for a little bit, really, to see what my options are. And to be fair, a lot of the ones that I see people fitting that are marked as upgrades are a hell of a lot smaller. Now I know that there is a difference between the AC model intercoolers and the non-AC model intercoolers, but maybe the AC models have really chunky intercoolers because they integrate the AC. Well, they don't integrate the AC in it at all because that's a separate rad condenser. So I don't understand why the smaller ones are considered an upgrade, or maybe it's just marketing BS. I know that obviously the internal design of an intercooler, a smaller one can have a much higher efficiency than a bigger one, therefore be a better intercooler overall. But with the size difference that I've been seeing, it's hard to believe that it could outperform the stock one. So I'm going to leave that for another episode, shall we say. But we've got a recirculating valve on this turbo, along with an actuated wastegate. So the new turbo's got an actuator, but doesn't have a recirc valve, so I'm going to be fitting a recirc blow-off valve just after the turbo. So it sort of mimics the setup we've got now as best it can. And again, I've looked at things like ram pipe tube sizing and stuff like that, and honestly, you don't need anything bigger than the stock stuff, which again means I'm going to see how it goes with the stock intercooler. But if there are gains to be had, upgrades will be made. But for now, I'm just going to take it one step at a time. So let's get this thing up in the air. That's more like it. So let's get rid of the air filter. Take the MAF sensor off. Disconnect the cable to the breather valve. Move this part of the loom out of the way. Disconnect the vac pipe for the recirc valve. Disconnect the ram pipe from the turbo outlet. Undo the Jubilee clip down here to release the intake hose for the inlet of the turbo. And of course, pull the pipe off there. I'm going to undo that 10mm bolt down there, so I can take the bottom side of the airbox off. I knew I'd put that somewhere. So let's move this out of the way. It's broken in there, I'm going to have to get a new one. Take this off here so we can move this out of the way, because that's also a brand new piece of pipe here from the boost controller to an old knackered one that needs replacing. So we're just going to be tidying up a little bit. Let's clip this, unclip this from here. We've got a coolant pipe there that needs taking off, which cools the turbo, and the top one here. There's no water cooling on the new turbo, so what I'm going to do is just use one of these pipes and short circuit the system. So let's do that now. That'll be safe there, won't it? Let's give it a go. I may have forgot to clamp off the pipe. Right, so got it cut off there, just tidy up that end and use it to go in the other end of the tube. There we are, that looks nice and smooth now and there's no rough edges on it, so find a way of routing that down there and sticking it in the other end of that hose, tighten it back up. Coolant hose bypassed, done. Remove the vac line to the actuator. I do have a proper tool for these, but with the tiny ones you don't need it. There we are. Same for the one on the outlet of the turbo for the boost reference. There we are. I'm going to undo this banjo nut, which is the oil feed for the turbo. I'm going to be binning this oil feed line, so I could just cut it, but I've took the banjo out of it. I'm going to bend it out of the way. But it has got a bracket on here, so I think that's going to be a 10mm nut with a 10mm bolt on the back. Take that off. I should be able to bend this out of the way then, because it goes down here underneath the oil cooler, behind the oil cooler, to a banjo bolt on the block. And it's quite tight access to get to that banjo bolt without actually removing the oil cooler. And to remove the oil cooler, it's a bit of a pain in the arse with the turbo in, which is fine if you're just trying to remove the oil cooler and replace the line. But when you're taking the turbo out anyway, you might as well just do it that way around. And if we don't need the hose or the feed pipe, we can just bend it out of the way. So there's our bent out of the way oil pipe. So the turbo's looking pretty bare at the moment. It's just held on by the bolts to the manifold, the bolts to the downpipe, and the oil return line, which is a hard line. I believe that's held on by a flange, and then it's push fitted into the block. So if it's push fitted into the block, I'm going to attempt to pull it up from that push fitting and take it out with the turbo. In terms of the other connections, I'm not going to try to disconnect it from the manifold. I'm going to take the manifold and turbo together. So the next thing to do is to undo the 3 bolts on the downpipe flange, which look pretty rusty, but I have had some WD-40 sprayed onto them multiple times, so we'll see how difficult they are to get off. And there's 3 of them. Once that's done, I'll start taking all of these manifold bolts out, which there are 8 of. So that's the downpipe disconnected. That came off very easy, and I can only imagine that was 100% down to the fact that it's been previously soaked multiple times. So let's pull the HT leads off now, just to make it a bit easier to get to the manifold bolts, and then we can undo those, and with a bit of jiggling and lifting we'll be able to pull the manifold and turbo out together. And luckily it was the same story with the manifold bolts. In fact, nearly all of them came out with the studs, which is nice because I've got new studs to put in. So there's only 2 studs remaining. They're the easiest ones to get to, and as we can see, we're now disconnected from the engine as such. I think it's just resting on the exhaust, and obviously it's connected still via the oil return. But I am just going to nip under the car to check that there's not any hidden brackets or anything, because sometimes, or a lot of the time, they'll have a bracket going from the downpipe to the bell housing, or from the manifold to the bell housing or something like that, or from the manifold to the block, or the turbo to the block, to stabilise it. So I'll go underneath, have a look at what it looks like from there, undo anything I can see from there. Might try to pry it up a little bit from underneath and give it a bit of a wiggle. But what I will do, now that I know it's just sat there, is try to remove these studs first, because they could be something that makes it a bit more difficult to get out if it just wants to come straight up. So I've been underneath, and if we bring you down here, we can just see, we should be able to just see. Don't know if you can see that. You should be able to see it from there though. A bracket. There is a bracket there. I don't know if you're seeing that, but I found one on the bottom of the manifold, going what looks like wrapping around something and bolting behind where the metal coolant pipe bolts on, unless I'm completely seeing things, but that's what I think I'm seeing. And the whole thing is definitely sturdier than it should be if it was just sat on top of the oil return line. Now I can only just see the nut for this bracket, and it looks really rusted, really hard to get to. Can't even tell what size it is. It looks like a 13, but it might be bigger because for some reason I couldn't get a 13 on it. Might just be because of the amount of rust. So that doesn't bode well, but yeah, let's see what I can figure out with this. Well, it's happened. That one bolt that I didn't know was there, or I forgot to check was there, and it's very rusty. It's not very happy. It's rounding off. I can't find anywhere to get any leverage on it, so I can't really flex the bracket enough to fatigue it enough for it to just snap. So it's kind of annoying, really. The thing is, the bracket's coming off the bottom of the manifold, so even if I were to undo these 4 bolts to get the turbo off the manifold, it would still be pretty inaccessible. But I might try that first. Other than that, it's going to be a case of undoing that bolt there, that big one, which will loosen the oil cooler. But obviously to do that I'd need to drain the oil filter or the oil, whatever's in that cooler, down. Well, it's leaning down towards the oil filter, so it's all going to be in the oil filter, I'd say. But I need to drain the oil out of there. The oil filter has a sandwich plate on it for the oil cooling section, which has got coolant going through it. So, and there's a drain plug down there for the coolant anyway. So I'm going to need to drain the coolant. This all needed doing anyway, because it's all going to come off because I'm putting a different one on. But I'm going to do those things now. So drain the coolant, take the oil filter off, take the sandwich plate off and the cooler off. And that should give me more access to the rest of the bracket, so that maybe I can unbolt the bracket from the block or cut the bracket off. So because all that needs doing, I'm going to do it now, because it can be done and it needs doing anyway at some point. Then if I can't get to enough of it, I will then come up here and try to get these nuts off, which I know are not easy. They're not you know, they've not been pre-lubed or pre-loosened. They're not, you can't really get a socket on them. It's like a spanner job at best. Some of them you can't really get much of a swing on them either, so and I've already tried one of them and it wasn't budging, so yeah, fun times. Okay, so I may have forgotten to record a few steps there, but I did what I said I was going to do. So I undid the water supply hoses for the oil cooler and drained all the coolant. I took off the oil filter, drained the oil from the oil cooler. I undid the I don't know what you'd call it, the union for the oil filter, the bit that screws through the middle. Why can't I think what that would be called? Anyway, I believe that was a 1 1/16 inch socket needed for that. Then I undid the big nut down there. That was a 32mm. Took out the oil cooler. So everything was out of the way. Then I could see the 13mm nut on the bottom of the bracket. I've just undone that with an impact wrench. So this should be free now, other than the oil pipe, the oil drain pipe, which is quite happily, you know, trying to come out by itself. So I think what I need now is just a good grip on this. Yeah, it's coming up. So I'm going to do that now with 2 hands. And there we have the turbocharger manifold, complete with oil drain pipe. There's the offending bracket and one of the washers for the heat shields, 2 of the exhaust manifold gaskets, which I dropped. I should say they fell down before I could get to them. So we're now fully stripped down. All I need to do now is cut the exhaust off so that can come out of the way. We'll be ready to start fitting new parts. I do also need to remove that banjo to get the oil feed line disconnected from the block, so that that can be discarded and I can use a custom one that I'm making. The bracket, I'm not too sure whether I'll keep it yet or not. It can be undone from the block pretty easily by the looks of it, so it's removable. So I'll get rid of that exhaust, get rid of that pipe, and maybe test fit the manifold and see where we sit with the manifold. Okay, that is the exhaust out of the way, the pipe off, left the bracket on for now, given everything a wipe down, including the faces for the exhaust gaskets and the oil cooler and stuff like that. There's been a bit of a development with the oil cooler. The modification I wanted to do, I'm not going to be able to do it now. I'm not going to go into detail as to why, but basically the part I bought isn't going to do it for me. It's not going to fit right. It's going to cause too many issues that need to get around that I can't get around at the moment without sort of spending time sourcing different parts to adapt things. So I'm going to leave that out, unfortunately, which means I still won't have oil temp on my gauge, but I will find eventually a way of tapping in somewhere for oil temp. So in the meantime, let's put the new studs in, and then we can let the new manifold sit on there and see what that looks like. There we have. I've just put 4 of the studs on for now, for ease of manifold on and offification, and I'll try to do this one-handed. Okay, so we get an idea of where things are sitting. That's what it's going to be like when it's tightened up. That bracket's not in my way at the moment, and I believe I can access it nicely from underneath, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. In fact, what I might do is, yeah, I think I'm going to leave that as it is. Well, I'll take this back off for now. I think I'll leave the bracket as it is, although I do remember that having the oil cooler there gets in the way of the bracket. So I might use the bracket to make a bracket to steady or, you know, support the new turbo. But anyway, I'll figure that out and make the next move. I've decided I didn't want the bracket, so that's gone. And the next thing I'm going to do is make up the new oil feed line and plumb it into the block end, and then have it routed and sticking up towards where the turbo is going to be, so that I can finish off, trim anything off it and fit the other end to it once I know how long I need it to be. Whilst I'm in this area and I've got that on, I can put the oil cooler back on and refit the oil filter and bring my lambda sensor, the wideband and the ECU's lambda sensor, up to the top of the engine bay so that they can be incorporated into an exhaust. Also, this heat shield for the brake master cylinder is going to be possibly a little bit in the way of the downpipe, so I'm going to be bending that right up against the brake reservoir so it gives as much clearance as possible while still keeping it there and functional. Then I'm going to whack the rest of the studs in for the exhaust manifold, and once the oil cooler is back on and the oil feed is fitted, I'm going to change the seal on the bottom of the pipe for the oil return, and I'm going to fit that back into the block. Then I'm going to cut the top off the oil return and slide on some heater hose that I bought that fits, clamp that on with a hose clamp, and then have the fit the sorry, no, I'm not going to do it that way around. I'm going to fit the top end to the turbo and have the hose pointing down towards the pipe, so that when it comes together the hose just slides onto the pipe and I can do it with the Jubilee from underneath. What time is it? It's turbo o'clock. Time to clock the turbo. So I've got the exhaust manifold roughly mocked up in its orientation with the cylinder head. That is bolted to the flange, so that dictates where the turbine housing sits. Meanwhile, the centre cartridge, the drain is pointing almost 12 o'clock upwards, so that needs to be turned. And I want the outlet of the compressor side around about 7 o'clock, between 6 and half 7ish. So I'm going to need to undo these 13 mils here to be able to turn the whole lot round, then nip it up. Then I'm going to need to undo these ones. Go over to undo these ones to move the compressor housing round independent of this, or whether to undo these ones to move the whole lot around, but I'll figure that out. So what I've done is I've undone these bolts here, and then I've completely removed the ones that are on the bracket for the wastegate actuator, because this needs to be in a fairly straight line, or at least needs to have a straight line of sight to the lever, so this is able to float now whilst the rest of it turns. So we can now turn the rest of the assembly somewhat. I should be able to. There we go. So I'm now going to turn this until the central cartridge is having this oil drain facing down. Okay, so as we can see, the manifold is in the correct position, which dictates the turbine housing. We've now got the central cartridge with the oil feed pointing pretty much bang on 12 o'clock. So because that doesn't matter where it sits in relation to these nuts, these bolts, these can be tightened back up now. That'll be these two clocked. Then we've got the compressor housing. So I've turned it pretty close to where I want it, so it's pointing down now about 8 o'clock-ish. Now if you look up here, the bracket is sitting pretty happy still. So if we were to bolt it on there, it'd be great. However, just a little bit further over, and it'll bolt in, you know, into the existing bolts that are there. Now we have this bracing piece here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bolt out, and swing this compressor, swing this bracing piece out the way, get a bolt in there, and basically move this around, move the bracing piece around the compressor housing, and just use the original bolts but in a different position. Okay, so I've got that level, they're all nipped up, we're happy with that, and that. So we're not quite there with this now. I've decided to take all the bolts off just so we can look in there. Ooh, bit it. So whilst I'm in here, I'm just going to sneak a bit of marmalade behind the seals, a bit more power from that, and that should do us. Okay, so with everything tightened back up, we can now see there's a brace going over those three holes, and the other three are taken up by the bracket for the actuator. Now we just need to double check. There might be a little bit of play on there. Just need to take up any excess play that there might be there, because it's in a possibly slightly different location, although it looks like it's on exactly the same angle. So if the holes in the casting are geometrically equal, then it should be in exactly the same position, but it's always best to double check. So you just want to make sure then that this is causing enough tension on this flap to have the wastegate held shut. Which is just doable. As you can see there, it's a little bit open, it's a little bit you know, so you'd want to be able, so that's going to want to push the boost. The boost will come through here and into here, and overpower the spring and push the rod, which will send the bottom of this lever and the whole thing will turn clockwise, which will cause, can we get some light in there? There we go. It will cause that valve there to open like that. So we don't want that. We'll just have a massive boost leak. So that therefore means that this rod needs to be shortened. And to shorten it, we can back off this nut here, remove this circlip, pop the rod off the end of this spindle, and then we can give this a few turns to bring it further up this rod, therefore making it shorter, and slide it back on, ideally under some tension. So therefore we would need to pull a little bit on here, or apply some pressure, just to get this to move a little bit, just to be able to get that on, so that in its default setting the spring in there is always pulling on that shut. The only thing that will open it is something overpowering the spring and causing it to push open. So I will make that adjustment. Other than that though, manifold will be bolted to the head. These will be bolted in place with the gasket. Might do some port matching, might not bother. The exhaust then will come away from here and is yet to be made. Just make sure we've got free spinnature, which we have. It's not going to carry on spinning, it's not ball bearing. Can't stretch to those luxuries in this day and age. So then we've got the centre cartridge with the oil feed on top. I'm going to go with a banjo fitting because there's a banjo fitting at the moment on the 13C. And that would just be an easy copy. Then we've got the outlet to the compressor housing pointing fairly downish. It's like 7 o'clock, which would be great. We can work with that. The only thing we've had to do is, because this has moved around one bolt in relation to where it was, it now means that this little silicon boost pipe doesn't quite reach. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame. If we could have turned this an eighth, probably would have gone on, but it doesn't. So I'll just get a slightly longer piece of boost hose for that, and we should be good to go. We should be all ready for the whirly times. That is the turbo clocked. Right, a little bit of port matching, might as well. This is the Kangaroo's cast manifold. As you can see, I've marked it. So this is the gasket that came with the turbo, and I've marked the inside of the gasket. So on the right hand side that's untouched. On the left hand side I have just opened that up a little bit to match the size of the gasket. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's smoother and bigger, and more importantly, where this centre part is here, it tapers into the centre of it. So once I do the same to the other one, this middle bit here will be like a blade, and it'll give the airflow something smooth to flow over without any unnecessary turbulence. I've got the same on the turbo, so I've placed the gasket over and just drawn around the inside there. Obviously what we don't want is exhaust gases coming out of there and hitting the gasket. We also don't want them coming out of there and hitting that bit of steel there, or that bit of steel there, or iron, or whatever it is. It's meant to be some kind of Inconel alloy. So I'll be opening that up as well, just to make it more of an even flow. Probably going to be minimal effectiveness in terms of actually overall power gain or anything like that, but on an engine that's already quite inefficient, that's not been a full rebuild, probably got some blow by and stuff like that, just general wear and tear. It's fairly low mileage for these engines, but it's still 130,000 miles, so either way it's probably not going to be operating as effective as it was from new, and that wasn't great to start with. So the less boost we have to force down its throat, the better. And obviously little things like this will just help a little bit. I'm also going to be checking, when I fit this, I'm going to be checking the port sizes versus the gasket versus the head size the head ports, just making sure that from the head it's not going to run in. I know it's not going to run into the gasket hole's always bigger than the head ports, but just making sure that the manifold ports are at least the same size, if not bigger, than the ones in the head, and that'll do me. So I'm going to carry on with this now and try and get them to match as best I can without going crazy. So I'm going to call that job done. As you can see, I've opened that up. I've made a few boo-boos with the die grinder, but I've flattened that back down with a flat disc and should seal alright. If we hold the gasket over there, you can see it's almost bang on. It's not perfect, but it's bigger than the hole that the gasket. It's bigger than the hole that comes out of the manifold. So I've opened this out, and you can see that's pretty sharp in the middle now. It's not quite a knife edge, but it's getting there compared to how it was before. And the edges have just been taken out a touch, but it's not much bigger than it was before. The main majority of the material has been removed from the middle. So now that'll pass through there freely. There'll be no turbulence, and when it gets through there, the hole that it meets on the other side will be slightly bigger than it. So again, a very small step. Very small step. The smaller the change, the better when it comes to gas flow. I've just I lost my manifold then. I've just done a little bit on the insides of there. It was just really rough. I don't know what it is. Team Kangaroo, what do you put on the inside of your castings? It's, I mean, let me get some light on the subject. So you can see in there it's really quite rough. The castings can't be that rough, surely. It's almost as if they've cast it. I mean, obviously this is me removing what I can. I'm trying to find you a good one where you can see where I've been able to reach up to with a rotary tool, but none of them look great. Anyway, it's not optimal. It's a good job it's turboed, because the forced induction will well, it's not, that's irrelevant for an exhaust, but on the inlet, if it was to be like that, forced induction would just force it past all the uneven surfaces. But it's not the smoothest of finishes. It's not a cheap product. 400 quid for a piece of cast iron. So I'd expect it to be a little bit better than that. I don't know if it's maybe something they've sprayed onto the outside. Like, I don't know if this is supposed to be some kind of a paint or ceramic coating, but maybe it's got in there and stuck on, and it's just really rough. You can see it again here. That's obviously, I mean, I'm going to say that's casting now, because if this is casting, then that's just as bad in there. I think there's areas where they paid more attention to it, and areas where they haven't, or you know, the casting material isn't up to scratch or something like that. But it is what it is. It'll do its job. And if I wanted super high power, well, first of all I'd be going with a better turbo than this and a better manifold than that. But there you go. So that's another job done. So there is the oil cooler back in place. I've put the old oil filter back on for now, just because I forgot to buy one, but I can throw a new one on as soon as I get this thing out of here. You literally use the car to go to the parts shop and then put a new one on. I've got all the studs in. Got the AN line fitting on with the banjo. Just going to a dead end at the moment. So everything is ready to accept the manifold and the turbo. So after mocking them up again, I've decided it's going to be easier to marry these two together and then install them together as one piece. Because it's going to be a pain in the arse to get to that bolt once the turbo's on. Almost a pain in the arse to that. These two are not too bad. But with them being with them going in from the top, I don't know. But I'm going to give it a go that way and see how we get on. Well, there we are. It's together and it's bolted. Well, it's sat on the studs at the moment with the gaskets in place. I just need to tighten up the manifold nuts now, and that will be roughly its seating position. And from there, I can route some boost pipes, and I can make the rest of the other end of the oil feed line, bolt that to the top with that banjo bolt there, and then it will be a case of plumbing in all of the turbo boost control system and building an exhaust, which, you know, there's just enough room to go down there with an exhaust. So that's what we'll be doing. Running out of battery now, so I don't know how much more I can record, but let's see what I can get done. I'll tighten these bolts up now on the manifold. I'll sort out the oil feed, and I think I'll go down and connect up the oil drains, just so that if I need to start it up and move it or anything, we're sealed on the oil side of things. I'll just have to make sure that I realise I've got open vacs and stuff lying around. Top up the oil, top up the coolant, and yeah, maybe finish it off tomorrow. That's the oil feed fitted. We've got an opening there. I've put the HT leads back on and zip tied them out of the way so that we've got a clear run for the exhaust to go down. So that's what I'm going to be getting on with now. So that's all tightened down, ready to make an exhaust, and then we can fire her up. Well, I'm just mocking up the first piece. I've just cut a 90-degree bend in two. I've got the band clamp piece on the end, and I'm in the right direction. I'm going to use the other half of it to get the rest of the 90-degree bend down there. So I'm going to weld this on to the ring now. That'll be the first bit of the exhaust done. I can weld in some bungs for the wideband, and it'll basically be a repeat of the way I made the rear part of the exhaust. So not really worth trying to film it all, especially when it slows everything down. So I'll come back when that's done. Well, if you want to see my pretty welding, I forgot that I was also using steel MIG wire and not stainless. I've changed it over to weld something different. I started welding this, and I'm just going to carry on with it because it welds so much nicer, and I've really not got much stainless left. I don't know what the use is for stainless MIG wire, because it just seems to weld really shit with MIG. It just doesn't seem to weld very good with MIG at all. I don't know if it's for specialist applications, but you know, when you see stainless steel TIG welded, it looks amazing, and even when it's not amazing, it still looks a lot better than what you can do with a MIG welder. Unless I'm using the wrong gas or I've not got the right machine. I don't know, but maybe it's just me. But when I looked into it, because I was so sort of surprised at how bad it was, I just got an abundance of information, like answers from the internet, just stating that stainless steel MIG wire is an absolute pain to work with. So it is what it is, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to be on show. So that takes us, we've got a downpipe, we've got a flexi, and then we've got this piece that sits under the car now. I'm going to drill some holes, and weld in some lambda bungs, and I believe that's as far as this piece goes. Then it's going to be attached with a sleeve clamp. That's going to attach it to this reducer, which will increase the size to 3 inches, which will accommodate this sports cat. So that'll be welded to that. That'll go into there. That'll attach to the bit I've just built. And after the sports cat, it should be a straight run to the pre-existing piece of exhaust that's there. I've got some straight tube there for however long it needs to be, and then when it reaches that, there's another sleeve clamp there, heavy duty sleeve clamps. So that means the exhaust will be in 3 pieces, which will mean that it's nice and easy to take off if I need to, or it'll be adjustable. You know, like, not adjustable as such, but there'll be some wiggle room in terms of how it sits. And then I'll just need to weld on some hangers. I've bought some stainless steel exhaust hangers to do a bit of a better job than what's currently holding it up, because it's some old exhaust straps. It just looks really weird. It's done the job okay, but it's just not, it's not proper. and eventually I'll get rid of that flexi pipe at the back of the exhaust, because it just there shouldn't be one there. Or if I can't be bothered to do that, I'll just weld some pipe over it to join it from both sides so that it becomes solid. Yeah, so I'll crack on.